Independents are crucial to this election, just as they were when they helped Democrats get that huge midterm win 2 years ago. Democrats are excited about a new poll they took that shows that 64% of swing voters say McCain's policies would be like those of President Bush. Only 30% say McCain would be a change from Bush. Kelly, how does John McCain, Mr. Straight Talk, be both the change agent and the loyal Bush guy?
Well, it's a perception challenge because he wants to distinguish himself, but he doesn't want to offend the president or people who still support the president, those strong conservatives. So part of what you're going to be hearing is the experience to change. They've been trying to figure out a way to contort themselves to come up with how is he a change agent. So they're going to lay out a number of the reforms from his career and say he's got the record of being able to buck the system.
But how's he do it? Does he say, if you like Bush, you'll love McCain? If you don't like Bush, here's a change? I mean, don't you have to decide, Clarence?
Well, McCain's always benefited from being both a change agent and a changeling. I mean, back in 2000, you know, a number of pro-choice voters ignored the fact that McCain was on record as anti-abortion, saying, well, he doesn't really mean it. I think that's the same way about his pro-Bush stance. People tend to say, well, he doesn't really mean it. He's doing it in order to placate the right.
Same thing happened in the latest polling. It showed that the pro-choicers are voting for the pro-life McCain. So he seems like, remember he said in the beginning of this, we show that you know me, we know him as a maverick. Let me ask you about the maverick thing. You wrote this great piece. I love the troublemaking, straight pieces you write, but the troublemaking you did was on the right and the far right. You said that the realists in the Republican Party, the pragmatists who are worried about the war in Iraq, are worried that he's being taken over by people who are ones who really push for that war.
Who brought us the war in Iraq. That's right. There's a core group, people we know, who lost out in the first Bush White House in the intense ideological battles. You know, Colin Powell, Richard Armitage, the former Deputy Secretary of State to Colin Powell, Brent Scowcroft, who was the National Security Advisor to Bush 41, Larry Eagleburger, another former Secretary of State, are all very concerned that there are an awful lot of neoconservatives around McCain right now. Right now, the battle is more about, I would say, access than it is about real policy.
Well, why are they with him if they think he's too hawkish?
Why are they with him? Because they thought he was their guy.
They thought he was more moderate.
Right. I mean, Colin Powell and John McCain are good friends. McCain is very, very close to Richard Armitage, and to them, this McCain was going to be, you know, the new Republican brand, you know, the new multilateralist in foreign policy.
Let me talk about this. You know, he's also great friends with Bill Kristol, a neoconservative. He seems to be able to. He calls himself, I think, in your piece, a bridge between the neo and the old style of more isolationist conservatives.
He is. As Elizabeth said, this is about access, not about ideology anymore. There were fights about the war in Iraq, but if you look at that speech that John McCain gave 2 weeks ago, which was written by Robert Kagan with supervision from Randy Schuneman, who are called neoconservatives, it was not a unilateralist speech. It was the opposite of a unilateralist speech. It was not solely obsessed with terrorism. It was obsessed with a whole range of foreign policy issues, about global warming. So they have these fights, which Elizabeth described in that piece, over access to John McCain, but they're no longer intellectual fights. They're over access. And McCain is not an ideological guy.
What he's doing, you're saying, is being bigger than the neoconservative movement. I have more concerns than just terrorism, and at the same time not offending the different branches. Clarence, can he do this? Can he thread this needle we're talking about here among the people who are ideologically with the president, part of the Bush doctrine, if you will, and those moderate Republicans in the burbs, wherever they are, who are looking for something really different?
Well, he seems to be pulling it off remarkably well, partly because of the force of his personality and his lack of conventional charisma. People relate to him well, and they feel like, well, he is a straight talker and a guy who really does look at both sides and at least will tell you what he really feels.
Why has that survived, that image of the straight talk guy, after he went back and made up with the religious televangelists, those guys, Robertson and Falwell? He made some other comments that he hugged Bush. How come they still think he's a straight talk maverick when he's been in league with the president?
Like I said, they think he doesn't really believe it.
I know this. That is the whole Irish thing in Massachusetts. They say, well, you know what I really think.
And
you're like, I vote this liberal line, but don't believe it, right?
Yeah, he keeps telling you the things that he's done wrong and his mistakes, and he does that on a weekly basis, which gives you this impression that he's at least self-reflective enough to...
Okay, let's talk turkey here.
Okay.
Everybody likes John McCain because he makes mistakes. That's why we like him. He says things like bomb, bomb, bomb Iran, like he's the Beach Boys, and then he says things like, well, recently, 100 years of military presence, and then spends weeks trying to explain what that means, how limited that statement was. Can he do that kind of stuff and still adhere to this very careful, sober, I've been here longer than Barack Obama. Can he do both?
Well, they've made a real decision that if he talks more and more and more, it dilutes the risk of making mistakes, as opposed really
more mistakes or fewer.
Well, fewer, or by saying so much that each mistake has less impact, whereas some other candidates have less access with reporters or the public and are far more controlled in what they say. So he's just sort of opening the door, knowing the mistakes will happen.
Speaking of freewheeling conversations, I've got to go to Elizabeth. We have all watched this scene on an airplane. You're standing, I think, somewhere. You're next to him. And you've asked him a simple question, which is, tell us about that meeting you had with John McCain, or John Kerry, John McCain, about possibly joining him on the ticket, the Democratic ticket back in 2004.
He didn't like the question. He thought it was a trap, and he became, I'm struggling to find an adjective here, because he became testy, I think, and the footage ran everywhere, and it was used as an example of McCain still having a temper and needing to be more disciplined on the campaign trail. But I think, here's what's interesting about McCain. He's a far more disciplined candidate than he was in 2000. All this talk about the straight talk, what I have found, I'm sure Kelly has found, is that he's much more on talking points than I think he ever used to be, and there's certain places he just won't go. So it works to his favor that he's a straight talk candidate, but I haven't, he's not, spilling his guts on the campaign trail by any means. He is, however, he does talk a lot. He's very accessible.
I love this. You guys are frontline. I love the fact you've been there with him on this very question. David, the question that a lot of women especially care about is choice, abortion rights. And although they may like the cut of his jib because he seems like a maverick, a sort of a suburban independent type, not part of some machine, he does relentlessly say he's for strict constructionists. He likes Scalia, he likes Roberts, he likes Alito. How does he break out of that?
He doesn't. That's what he believes. He's believed that for 30 years. The guy is pro-life. He's a conservative. The way he breaks out of it, though, electorally, is to beat Teddy Roosevelt. And this is going to be the toughest thing for his campaign. He's got a group of people around him, and frankly, a group of party that doesn't want the government to do anything to help poor people. And he has to break out of that. He's begun to do that on housing.
Especially when there are more poor people now.
Right, but he's got to say, hey, Teddy Roosevelt took on corporations. He took on the health insurance. He took on the trust of his day. And it's going to be and this is going to be the toughest part of his campaign, is breaking out of the restrictions on the role of government to be aggressive on behalf of people, sometimes against corporations, which is going to make the party feel uncomfortable. But to me, it's his only shot at getting those white working class he needs.